first thing that hit me wasn't the sight of my life packed into cardboard coffins on the porch, but the scent, a sharp, cloying perfume. Katie's perfume, drenched in the saltwater mist, clinging to my favorite armchair, left out in the damp evening air. Taped to its sodden velvet back was a single, pristine white envelope, but it was the object shattered at my feet that truly stole my breath. The porcelain music box my late husband, Robert, gave me on our first anniversary. Its delicate ballerina snapped at the waist, her silent scream echoing my own. 6 words were scrawled inside that envelope, on a piece of torn notebook paper, written in the elegant, looping script of my son Tom's girlfriend. We needed the space. It's done. No warning, no final argument, just a quiet, surgical erasure. In that moment, as the fog rolled in from the harbor and settled like a shroud over the manicured lawns of Port Blossom, I realized something deeper than betrayal had occurred. This wasn't just about being pushed out of the Victorian seaside home where I'd raised my son. It was about being replaced, my entire existence deemed an inconvenience, a piece of clutter to be discarded without a second thought. Have you ever stood on the threshold of your own life and realized the locks had been changed? The air had been still when I'd left 3 days prior, the kind of heavy, humid quiet that precedes a summer thunderstorm. I'd driven down the coast to visit an old university roommate, a brief respite. There had been no fight. Tom had even hugged me by the car, a quick, almost perfunctory embrace. Katie had promised to water the hydrangeas, but as I stepped from the taxi onto the cobblestone driveway, a deep wrongness permeated the air. The warm yellow light of the porch lamp was extinguished. The Grand Bay windows were dark, like vacant eyes. And then I saw the carnage. My suitcase, a lifetime of travel etched into its worn leather, sat neatly beside a stack of plastic storage bins. On top lay a hand-stitched quilt I'd made the year Tom was born, its edges frayed with time and countless bedtime stories. My reading lamp, 2 framed photographs, one of Robert, his smile forever young, and one of the 3 of us on Tom's first day of kindergarten. And next to them, the envelope, a white flag of surrender I had never agreed to wave. Sorry, Mom. No space for you anymore. That was the note I'd imagined. The one Tom might have written, but he hadn't even granted me that. He'd outsourced my eviction to the woman who now slept in my bed. I stood still for a long while, the cold seeping through my shoes. I didn't cry. The shock was a crystalline thing, too sharp and clear for tears. I didn't knock on the door I still legally owned. There was nothing left to say. I carefully lifted my suitcase, placed the unbroken photo of Robert inside, and tucked the quilt under my arm. I walked away from that door without looking back. My footsteps were swallowed by the fog. No one parted the curtains to watch me go. The silence was more deafening than any shouting match could ever be. At the corner of the street where the gas lamps began to flicker on, I stopped. I turned around just once. The house was a dark silhouette against a bruised purple sky. I kept walking. That first night, I found refuge on a bench overlooking the choppy gray waters of the harbor, just a few blocks from the house. It wasn't comfortable, but I wasn't ready to call anyone. I didn't want pity. Not yet. I needed silence. Not the cold, weaponized silence of a locked door, but the soft, unassuming kind that lives in the pre-dawn air and the cry of distant gulls. This harbor had always been my sanctuary. Years ago, before Katie, Tom had helped me refinish this very bench. I taught him how to skip stones across the water's surface, how to identify the constellations. Now I sat in the same spot, older, stiffer, but still trying to piece together a map from the wreckage. The sun was just beginning to burn through the morning mist when I walked to a nearby cafe. I didn't have a destination. I just needed to move. By mid-morning, I found myself walking past a new development of sleek, modern townhouses overlooking the marina. Tom and Katie had mentioned them once, their voices bright with ambition, and through the sheer, floor-to-ceiling curtains of a corner unit, I saw them. Tom stood near a glass dining table. Katie sat across from him, flipping through a glossy brochure. Their heads were close, their expressions a mixture of excitement and intense focus. Katie laughed, a sharp, bright sound that didn't reach her eyes. She held up the brochure. It was for a high-end kitchen remodel, gleaming quartz countertops, stainless steel appliances. She pointed at it with a manicured finger, her enthusiasm almost aggressive. Tom looked away. He picked up a coffee mug but didn't drink. His gaze drifted toward the window, and for a heart-stopping second I thought he saw me, but his eyes were unfocused, looking at nothing at all. Katie said something else, and Tom nodded slowly. His shoulders slumped in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager, trying to avoid a difficult conversation. That's when something inside me shifted. The cold shock began to melt, replaced by a slow-burning heat. All the tiny, discordant moments from the past few months snapped into place. The time Katie had insisted on helping with the household accounts, taking the passwords and paperwork into her own hands. The way Tom would expertly steer conversations away from long-term plans for the house. The strange, legal-looking mail that had started arriving, addressed to him at my address. The small hesitations in his voice, the flicker of guilt in his eyes I had mistaken for stress. I hadn't missed the signs. I had chosen not to see them, because seeing them would have meant acknowledging a truth too monstrous to comprehend. I stood there, a ghost at their feast, until the curtain moved, and I walked away. My legs felt heavy, not from exhaustion, but from the crushing weight of a deliberate, calculated betrayal. This wasn't a spontaneous act, it was a campaign, and I had been the last to know I was under siege. I ended up at the public library, not for the books, but for the anonymity and the charging outlets. My phone had died, and I hadn't packed a charger, assuming I'd be home. I found a secluded carrel and plugged it in. It buzzed to life, and a single notification blinked on the screen. A missed call from Tom. At 11:42 p.m. the night before. No voicemail, no text, just a digital breadcrumb. A perfunctory gesture of concern. I stared at it, then slipped the phone back into my pocket. Evelyn? Evelyn Vance? The voice was a familiar anchor in the disorienting sea I was drowning in. I turned to see Isabel Rossi. We hadn't seen each other in years, not since I'd retired from the legal insurance firm where we'd both been underwriters. Isabel was sharp, pragmatic, the kind of woman who read the fine print of life and never missed a detail. We hugged, and she asked what brought me to the library on a weekday. I gave a vague answer, but Isabel read my face like a contract full of loopholes. She led me to a small sitting area, and after a few minutes of small talk, she leaned in. She'd run into Katie a week ago at a local business mixer. Said Katie was effusive, talking about their plans for the family home, hinting at a possible sale. A new development was opening up, and they were looking to invest. Isabel had simply assumed I'd already downsized. I didn't answer. I just let the silence confirm her suspicions. "Something's wrong, isn't it?" she said, her voice dropping. I nodded slowly. Isabel asked if I had clear title to the house. I said, "I believe so. Robert and I set it up that way." She told me to double-check everything. She'd recently consulted on a case where a son, with power of attorney, had quietly transferred assets, moved his mother into a cut-rate care facility, and flipped her house in under a month. The blood drained from my face, not from fear, but from the chilling ring of recognition. Katie, offering to handle the utility bills. Tom, forgetting to give me the property tax notice. The checkbook that went missing last spring. They weren't oversights. They were brushstrokes in a masterpiece of deception. Isabel offered to help. She handed me her card, her new one, for the consulting firm she'd started for women navigating complex family legal battles. "Too many of us are edged out of our own lives by paperwork and polite lies," she said, her eyes flashing with a familiar fire. That afternoon, I rented a small P.O. box, my name, my address. It was just a metal drawer in a federal building, but it was a start. It was a place to redirect my identity, a place they couldn't touch. That evening, as I checked into a modest hotel, I felt something other than sadness. It was the unnerving calm before a storm, but this time, I was the storm. The key to my old office still worked. I hadn't set foot in the loft space above the Old Harbor bookstore in over 5 years, but my hand remembered the turn of the lock, the specific way the old wooden door swelled in the damp sea air. I'd kept the lease as a quiet retreat after Robert passed, a place to untangle the complexities of grief and insurance claims for other widows. The air inside smelled of dust, lemon oil, and the faint, acidic trace of old paper. In a locked filing cabinet in the back, beneath a stack of expired policies, I found what I was looking for: the original deed to the house, the notarized title, the co-ownership agreement. Robert and I had drafted decades ago. Everything was solely and unequivocally in my name. Tom's name wasn't mentioned anywhere. We had wanted him to build his own life, not simply inherit ours. But there was more. I found a recent stack of utility bills I'd brought with me. All of them had been switched to Katie's name. My name was gone. It hadn't been gradual, it had been surgical. At the top of one envelope was a copy of a utility transfer request. The signature in the authorization box was a clumsy, almost insulting forgery of my own. They were already replacing me on paper, as if I had never existed. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. A cold, sharp clarity settled over me. I took the deed, the agreement, and the forged document, placed them in a fireproof safe under the desk, and locked it. They thought I was out in the cold, but they had no idea what I still held, not just legally, but in memory, in resolve, and in proof. The next morning, I met Isabel for coffee. I laid the documents on the table between us. She skimmed every page, her expression hardening. "This is groundwork for a forced sale, Evelyn," she said quietly. "They're trying to build a case that you're not competent, that they're managing your affairs. They think you won't fight back." Her words didn't sting. They affirmed what I already knew. Isabel made a call. Within minutes, she had a name: Silas Croft, a semi-retired estate attorney known for his unorthodox but brutally effective methods. "He doesn't just read contracts," Isabel said. "He reads people." 2 days later, I stood on the porch of Silas Croft's office, a restored captain's house overlooking the sea. He was older than me, with a mane of silver hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. He greeted me with a calm nod and led me into a room lined with books. I handed him the file. He read slowly, his focus absolute. When he was done, he folded his hands. "None of this changes the fact that you are the sole legal owner," he said, his voice even and deep. "The utility transfers, the mail redirection, it's circumstantial. It's not a lawful transfer of title. But if they attempt to leverage it for a sale or a line of credit, it becomes fraud." He walked me through the next steps: a strategy of quiet fortification, a formal cease and desist letter, a notification to the county clerk's office to flag the property against any unauthorized transactions, a protective memorandum filed with the local real estate board, alerting them that any claim on the house not originating from me was to be considered suspect. It wasn't dramatic. It was a wall, built brick by brick. I signed the documents with a hand that did not shake. That afternoon, couriers delivered sealed envelopes to Tom's office at the investment firm downtown and to Katie's workplace, a high-end wellness spa she managed. They hadn't just taken my silence for granted, they had mistaken it for surrender, and that was a mistake they would come to regret. The call started on a quiet Wednesday afternoon. Tom's name flashed on my screen. I let it ring, and ring again. 5, 6 times. Then a text from Katie, short and sharp. "You didn't have to do this." I didn't reply. Hours later, I sent back a single line: "Every action has a consequence." The silence, I knew, would be louder than any argument. The next morning, I walked through my old neighborhood. I could see the house from a distance. The blinds were drawn tight. By noon, Isabel called. Tom had emailed her, asking if the documents were legitimate. Silas had replied himself, professionally and briefly, confirming the cease and desist was active and offering to direct him to the public property records if he required independent verification. No threats, just a wall of impenetrable fact. That evening, Tom showed up at my loft. He knocked, then waited. I opened the door just enough to see his face. He looked tired, confused, more than angry. He asked if we could talk. I stepped aside, not to welcome him, but to show I was not afraid. He said he hadn't known about the forgeries, that Katie had taken the lead because she thought I was getting frail, that it was never supposed to go this far. Lies, layered on top of half-truths. I listened without interruption. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered, not as a mother, but as a woman speaking to a man. "Why didn't you stop her?" He looked at the floor, the picture of a man cornered by his own cowardice. "Because I didn't want the conflict," he mumbled. "It felt easier to let her handle it. I didn't think you'd push back." He hadn't chosen her over me. He had chosen comfort over character. And that, I realized, was the deepest betrayal of all. When he left, I closed the door, not with rage or grief, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had finally lost the illusion of family and found something steadier in its place: herself. A few days later, a new offensive. A courier delivered a carbon copy of an internal inquiry from a real estate firm, addressed to Tom and Katie, requesting documents for a pre-sale evaluation of my house. They were testing the walls we had built. I called Silas. Within hours, he had filed a second-level restriction, flagging the realtor directly with legal notification. Any further inquiries would require my direct, notarized authorization. The audacity stunned me. Not just the attempt to erase me from the deed, but the sheer arrogance of believing the years I had poured into that home could be dismissed by a forged signature. That Sunday, Tom came again. He said Katie had made a mistake, that she was scared I would retaliate and make things public. He used words like misunderstanding, oversight, communication gap. I looked him in the eye. You knew, Tom. You've always known, and you let it happen because it benefited you. He didn't argue. He said standing between me and Katie was impossible, and in that moment I saw it all. He wasn't manipulated or trapped. He had made a choice. Comfort was easier than courage. I thanked him for his honesty and closed the door with the finality of someone who could no longer pretend not to see the truth. The final blow came a week later. Isabel called me into her office. She had a file thick with printouts from a private records monitor. Tom had created a joint online profile with my name and attempted to secure a home equity line of credit. The application included a scanned copy of my old driver's license and the forged utility bill. This is wire fraud, Silas said when we met that afternoon. He moved swiftly, filing a formal complaint with the bank's fraud unit and a notice with the district attorney's office under a quiet flag protocol, freezing any and all transactions using my name or address. A silent lockdown. The climax, visuals of a tense meeting in a living room. The invitation came as a text from Tom. We're having a family discussion Saturday. Time to clear the air. I forwarded it to Silas. He replied in minutes. I'll come with you. The living room was staged for a ceasefire, cushions fluffed, candles lit, a cheese board untouched on the coffee table. Katie began, her voice smooth. We know there's been some tension. This is still your home, too. Silas placed a bound document on the table. Actually, he said, his voice calm and resonant, this home belongs solely to my client, Evelyn Vance. Any representations otherwise have been formally challenged. We are also aware of forged documents submitted to multiple financial institutions. Those filings have been reported. Further action is pending. The color drained from Tom's face. Katie blinked, her mask of civility cracking. I stood up. You tried to write me out of my own life, I said, my voice steady. You thought I wouldn't notice. Then I turned and walked out. At the door, Silas paused. If you attempt to interfere again, he said, legal proceedings will follow, immediately. The resolution. A sense of peace and finality. Visuals of a new, sunlit apartment. The next morning, I walked into the old house one last time. They were in the kitchen, silent. I'm selling the house, I announced. Tom looked up, his lips parted. But, where will you live? That is no longer your concern, I said, not unkindly, but without softness. I placed a folder on the table, the listing agreement, already signed. The proceeds will not be going to you, I continued. I've transferred the full value of the sale into a trust, a foundation for women over 60 who have been manipulated, discarded, or silenced by their own families. It will help them find legal support, housing, and dignity. Isabel will be the executive director. Silas will oversee compliance. I didn't wait for a reply. I stepped outside, closed the door gently behind me, and walked away. The sun was rising and my breath fogged in the crisp air, but I felt warm. I pulled out my phone and tapped send on the press release. Silas had drafted. The foundation would go public that week. My new apartment was small, but it was filled with morning light. I began to write, to walk, to heal. The silence didn't feel like abandonment anymore. It felt like space. One afternoon, I found the old graduation photo. I hadn't noticed before, but someone had trimmed the edge. My face had been cleanly cut out, surgically removed. I stared at it, not with sadness, but with recognition. I placed the mutilated picture in a small wooden box and closed the lid. People think healing is loud, like thunder, but sometimes it moves like breath, quiet and slow. I never erased them from my memory. I simply chose not to center my life around people who had edited me out of theirs. That spring, I planted lavender on my new windowsill. It grew crooked and uneven, but it bloomed. That was enough. If this story found a quiet place in you, thank you for listening. So many of us walk through years of silence before we finally choose ourselves. Have you ever felt erased? Not in words, but in presence. Your story has weight, and sometimes in the telling, we begin to bloom again, quietly and steadily, in our own light. Don't let anyone else write your ending. This channel is a sanctuary for those ready to reclaim their narrative. If you're not subscribed, you're one algorithm change away from losing this community, a community that fights back against silence.